Good morning, good morning. Well, we're continuing our study on the Cherokee Indians being descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel. And we are getting closer to the end. Today we're going to cover proof number 14. Is the Cherokee Indians, there's several punishments, or there are different types of punishments. And a quote from a dad, remember, he lived with the Cherokee Indians over 40 years. He was a trader back in the 1700s, and he learned their language, lived with them. And he wrote a book comparing all of the similarities of the Cherokee Indians with the tribes of Israel from the Bible. And he says that the Cherokee Indians, he says there's many different similar punishments that the Cherokee Indian tribe had that resembled those of the Jews. And you said punishments, yes, we can read all throughout the Levitical law is God's command for the children of Israel concerning those who disobeyed God's law. Let's begin with talking about the Israelites and then comparing them with the Cherokee Indians. You can read in Exodus chapter 21. Oh, I wish I had time to read this whole chapter. It is so good. In Exodus chapter 21. But we'll just read just a select few verses so that you can see the different types of punishments if you broke God's commandments. Verse 12, it says, "He that smiteth a man so that he die shall be surely put to death." In other words, if you commit murder, then you're going to die. You're going to be put to death. Verse 17, "He that curseth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death." Think about that. You would be stoned. A child that cursed his father or mother, the punishment was you going to die. That would deter a lot of children from being disobedient, disrespectful to their parents. Verse 23 says, "If a serious injury occurred during a fight, if two of the Israelites got into an argument, got into a fight, then thou shalt give life for life." In other words, if you're fighting, if you kill the one that you're fighting with, then you're going to die. Verse 24, "Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning." We don't understand that, but that would be like branding. You saw the old cowboy shows on TV where they would brand cattle. They would just take a hot iron from the fire and stick it on that cow's hide, and it would put the brand, a mark of that rancher into that cow's hide, so that anyone who saw that cattle or sheep, whatever they were branding, would know that, hey, this belongs to this ranch over here, and I better not take it, and I better return it to them. So God said, branding for branding, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. It was equal punishment for equal crime in God's eyes. Think about it, an eye for an eye. If you got into a fight and you punched your brother in the eye and put out his eye, that means your eye's going to be put out. That would eliminate a lot of crime. If you knew that if you hurt somebody, that what you did to that one you was angry at and got into a fight with, the same thing's going to happen to you. That was God's equal punishment for the crime that was committed. Verse 29 says, "If an ox was known to gore," in other words, if it was known to take its horns and try to attack a man. It says, "If an ox was known to gore, and the owner has been warned but did not confine it, and it kills someone, then what does God's law says? The ox shall be stoned, and his owner also shall be put to death." So, in other words, if you knew that you had to say for us a dog that attacked other people, and we had that a few years ago in Rainsville, a vicious dog, and the neighbors had called the police, and they had talked to this neighbor that owned this vicious dog time and again to keep the dog chained or tied up, and the owner would not, just left it loose. And so the pastor of a church was taking a pot of soup to one of his church members that was sick. So he pulled up in the yard, and they yelled at him out the door, "Watch for that dog, look for that dog." It was the neighbor's dog. So he looked around, no dog present, and so he took the soup to the door and went in and prayed with his church member, came back out, and they told him to look for that dog. And so when he started out, he looked around, didn't see the dog, but about halfway across the yard back to his car, he heard the dog barking, and he said it was running so fast, and he jumped up and with his paws hit him in the chest, knocked him down, and attacked him. Viciously attacked him. He had to have plastic surgery on his face. And if another neighbor hadn't saw that dog would have killed that man. This is in Rainsville just a few years ago. And you know what God's punishment would have been? Yeah, it would have been, you knew your dog attacked, you knew your dog bit, and you still refused to chain it up, therefore you're going to die because your dog took the life of another man. That's the same principle. An eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, life for a life in God's eyes. We have some more biblical examples in 2 Samuel chapter 4. 2 men murdered a righteous man. And David said, King David, he said, I'll tell you what the punishment is. I'm going to judge in this matter. And he said, I'm going to require his blood, this righteous man that you killed, I'm going to require his blood at your hand. In other words, you're going to die. So King David ordered that these 2 murderers that killed this righteous man, King David said, you're going to be killed. And he ordered that their hands and their feet would be cut off. And then David had them hanged. Wow. He was upset, wasn't he? Because these 2 men had killed a man that was righteous. And God said, you're going to die. And then he ordered their hands and their feet to be cut off. And then he ordered them to be hanged. Aren't you glad that we live in New Testament days? The days of grace instead of these laws that were adhered to back in the Old Testament days. In Deuteronomy chapter 13 verse 5 and also chapter 18 verse 20, false prophets were to be killed. Why? Because God said that they would turn the people's hearts away from serving God. And so God said, if you're going to prophesy lies, then you're going to die. Now, there were 3 other main ways that people died according to God's laws. There was the death by burning. Did you realize that that was one of the laws? And it was punishment for sexual depravity of a man who marries a woman and her daughter. God had said that is detestable, and if you do that, you're going to die. You're going to be burned to death. Leviticus chapter 20, verse 14. Look it up and read it. The second was prostitution. We have the account in Genesis chapter 38, verse 24. You remember Judah? He was traveling, and his daughter-in-law Tamar deceived him. She put on harlot's clothing, sat by the roadside. Judah came, saw her there, thought she was a prostitute, and went in with her. And then a few months later, those of Judah's household said, hey, your daughter-in-law has played the harlot. And he said, you bring her forth, you command her, she's going to be burned to death. And what did she do? She said, you remember the story? She said, whose these items belong to? They're the father of this child. And they were Judah's, because she had said, you give me a pledge, you give me a sign that you will pay me money. And so he gave her his staff. And so couple of more things, and she just brought them out. She said, whoever owns this, that's the father of this child that I'm carrying. Whoops! So Judah was caught, but he would have had her burned to death. Now, the third reason that someone was burned to death in Old Testament days was taking devoted things, things which belonged to God. We have the story of Achan in Joshua chapter 7. You remember Achan. The children of Israel had just entered the promised land. They had took the land of the city of Jericho. The walls had fallen down flat. So then the next city they came to was, we would pronounce it Ai, but in Hebrew it's I, A-I. Hebrew would be I. And so the men of the army told Joshua, oh, this is a tiny little city. We don't have to send out the whole army of Israel, just a few thousand men. Well, the army of Ai whipped them, defeated them, and when Joshua inquired of the Lord, he said it's because there's sin in the camp. And so you remember the story? They started dividing all the children of Israel by tribes. And it narrowed it down to the tribe that Achan was a member of. And then they kept narrowing it down, and it was Achan. And you remember what he had done? He saw the Babylonian garments, he saw gold and silver, and he looked around and said, man, nobody will ever know. I'm just going to take some and I'll be rich. So he hid those items in his tent. He buried them, you remember? So then they went into his tent, searched his tent. When he finally fessed up that he had taken the accursed things, the things that belong to God, because God said, you don't take anything from this city, but Achan did. And so the punishment was that he and his whole house, they were stoned to death, then their bodies were burned. So God was pretty serious in Old Testament days. That was death by burning. Death by stoning is the next punishment. That was punishment for adultery. You can read an example, Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 24. Death by stoning was also for idolatry. If you bowed down and worshipped idol gods, God said you are to die by stoning. Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 2 through 5. The book of Leviticus chapter 20, verse 2. And then the third reason for stoning was blaspheming. Blaspheming the name of the Lord. Leviticus chapter 24, verse 16. And then the third way of people being put to death, capital punishment in Old Testament days, was death by hanging. We don't think about that much, do we? But think about how Jesus died. He was considered a criminal, and what happened to him? He was hung on a cross. Death by hanging. In Old Testament days, bodies of the enemy kings were often hung on a tree or a cross. That is what the cross was called. It was called a tree back then. So the enemy kings, especially the enemy kings, were often hung on trees. You can read about that in Joshua chapter 8, verse 29, chapter 10, verse 26. And we have an example in 2 Samuel chapter 21, how King Saul and his sons, they were killed, and then they were hung. Their bodies were hung on trees, on crosses by the Philistines. And God commanded the children of Israel to kill their enemies without showing mercy back in Old Testament days. Why? Well, look at Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 16 through 18. But of the cities of these people, which the Lord thy God did give thee for an inheritance, thou shalt save alive nothing that breatheth. In other words, they were to kill every person in those cities. They were to kill even the animals. Verse 17. but thou shalt utterly destroy them, namely, especially these cities. Why? Because they were the worst cities for idolatry, namely the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee, that they teach you not to do after their abominations which they have done unto their gods, little g, their idol gods. So should ye sin against the Lord your God. So all of these punishments that we have just covered, they seem harsh to us, don't they? But why would God command such harsh punishment? Because he tells us right here, I don't want you to intermarry with these heathen nations. Why? Because you'll start bowing down to their idol gods. You'll start worshiping the gods that these heathen nations worship. And then you'll even start sacrificing your children in the fire to these false gods. And that's exactly what the children of Israel did. They began to intermarry. Instead of destroying and wiping out these enemy nations, they started marrying the women, having children. Before long, they was worshiping these nations, false gods, and it got to the point where the children of Israel was even sacrificing their children in the fire to these idol gods, burning their children alive to these false gods. And God said, that's it. You're going into captivity. I'm going to allow these enemy nations that you worship their gods. I'm going to allow you to be taken captive by these nations. And going into captivity, that cured the southern kingdom of Israel from worshiping idols. The nation of Israel, after they came out of captivity, they never worshiped false gods again. So, let's begin to compare the punishments that God has set in place in the Old Testament compared to the Cherokee Indians there. He says, quote, that the Indians torture their prisoners and devoted captives with a mixture of all of the Jewish capital punishments. In other words, the Cherokee Indians, they would torture, they would put to death their enemies, tribes that attacked them, and using a combination of all of these Old Testament forms of punishment. How would they know that? Because they're descendants from the original tribes of Israel. And back in Old Testament days, the Israelites were known to cut off the heads of their enemies. We don't think about that, but think about the story of David and Goliath. Goliath was the Philistine giant, and what did David do? He cut off Goliath's head. You can read about it, 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 21. We have another account of a man named Sheba, S-H-E-B-A, in 2 Samuel chapter 20. Sheba started a rebellion against King David. And Joab, he was the general of King David's army. And so Joab and the army of Israel surrounded the city where this man Sheba had ran to get away from David's army. And so David's army surrounded this city and was going to attack the city, burn it to the ground, kill everyone in this city. But I wish we had time to read the passage, but there's so many scriptures, we'd be here 3 hours if we tried to read it. But read this chapter when you get home, or sometime this week. 2 Samuel chapter 20. It says, a wise woman, she leaned over the city wall and said, Joab. And he said, what do you want? So back and forth, here's this older woman having a conversation. She said, now why or you wanted to destroy this whole city and me. I am a mother in Israel. So she was she was a Jewish woman, and she said, hey, General of the army, are you going to kill me? I'm one of your people. I'm a mother in Israel. And are you going to wipe out this whole city just because of this one man that started the rebellion? And she said, what if we deliver him to you? Just him. Will you not attack us? Will you spare my life and the life of the people in this city? And Joab said, you bet you. So she gave the command. You know what they did to this man Sheba, who had started a rebellion against King David? They ordered that Sheba's head be cut off and it be thrown over the wall down to Joab. So this woman saved herself, saved an entire city, and what did they do to this man who had started the rebellion? Off with his head, cut his head off, threw it over the wall. Man, I just spoiled your appetite for lunch, didn't I? I thought when I was going through all these different punishments, I thought, oh man, they're not going to want to eat lunch after we go through all these punishments. But think of that, a woman that said, hey, I'm a mother in Israel. Are you going to kill me? And are you going to kill this whole city just because of this one man who is in this city that is the one that started the rebellion? And the general of David's army said, nope, give this man, just this man to us. So, cut his head off, threw his head over the wall. Now, the Indians' variation of this punishment. Since the Indians could not carry the heads of their enemies for sometimes hundreds of miles to get back to their home village, why? Because of putrefaction. That head of their enemy would begin to rot, it would begin to decay, it would begin to smell, there would be a foul odor. So some of the Indian tribes cut off the skin of the heads of their enemies. What's that called? Scalping. And there made a note that the Cherokee Indians were not known for scalping their enemies. There are a few documented cases that Cherokee Indians did scalp some of their enemies, but that is rare. It's nothing even close to the uncivilized tribes or the wild or the savage tribes. And now remember the white man, this is white man that divided the Indian tribes in between the savage and the civilized. And this is the U.S. government is the one that came up with the names for the tribes. And that was what white man called them. So the uncivilized, the wild, the savage tribes, the ones most noted for scalping their enemies were Apache and Comanche. They were the tribes that were most noted for scalping their enemies. And remember, we talked about it before, there were 5 civilized tribes of Indians. Number 1 is Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole nations. And of these 5 civilized Indian tribes, the Cherokee was the most civilized. Why? Because the Cherokee established their own written language in the year 1821. The Cherokee Nation had a national Supreme Court that they set in place in the year 1822. And they developed their own written constitution in 1827. They had a constitution just like America has a constitution. So these 5 tribes were called civilized. Number 1, because white man said that they adopted Christianity. Christianity among these 5 civilized tribes was widespread. They accepted the gospel. Why? Especially Cherokee. They from the 12 tribes of Israel. They were familiar with the Old Testament. And the second reason that these 5 tribes were called civilized was because that they grew plants for food and medicine. And a lot of them were farming tribes. And the third reason is that they developed written constitutions or governments. And like I said, the Cherokee Indian nation had their own written government. And the fourth reason is that they intermarried with the white Americans. So that's the 4 reasons that have the white man, the U.S. government, labeled these 5 tribes as being civil tribes, civilized tribes. Now, let's cover some more facts within this one point, this one proof concerning the Indians' punishment for crimes. Number 1, the Indians followed God's instruction concerning their priest, whom they call Indian, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly or not, Ishtooloo, Ishtooloo. It's the Cherokee Indian term for holy men. We would say it would be the priest, like the Levitical priest in the Old Testament. So the Cherokee Indian holy men were absolutely forbidden to kill anyone for any reason. And that their beloved holy men or priests, they were the ones, remember, that officiated. They were in charge of the yearly grand sacrifice of the expiation of sin. We would say, for us, the Jewish people today, it would be the feast of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And so the Indian priest must be clean from the stain of shedding human blood. That was God's law too. God said that the Jewish priests were to by no means shed human blood. Remember, they were in charge with of the animal sacrifices, to apply the blood of the animal sacrifices for the atonement of the children of Israel's sin. Now, what tribe was King David a member of? He was from the tribe of Judah. And you remember King David wanted to build a house for the Lord. He wanted to build a temple. But in 2 Chronicles chapter 17, God spoke to David through the prophet Nathan. And God told King David that you cannot build my house. What was the reason? Well, Nathan told David, you can't build it, and this is why. Then David was talking to his son Solomon. In 1 Chronicles chapter 22, verses 7 through 9, David said to Solomon, my son, as for me, it was in my mind. He said, it was in my heart. I wanted to build a house unto the name of the Lord my God. But the word of the Lord came to me, saying, thou hast shed blood abundantly, and hast made great wars. Thou shalt not build an house unto my name, because thou hast shed much blood upon the earth in my sight. Verse 9, behold, a son shall be born to thee. This is David rehearsing the words of the prophet Nathan to Solomon. And then the prophet Nathan told David, behold, a son shall be born to thee, who shall be a man of rest, and I will give him rest from all his enemies round about. For his name shall be Solomon. So God said, you want to have a son, David, and this is what you're going to name him, Solomon. And I will give peace and quietness unto Israel in his days. So now, why wouldn't God allow King David to build a temple for the Lord, a house for the Lord to dwell in? Because he had shed blood. He had been in many wars and killed many people. And God said, nope, you're a man of war. You've shed blood, so you cannot build my house. But your son, you're going to have a son later on, David, and you're going to name him Solomon, and he's going to build my house. And he's not going to be a man of war. And there was peace all during the Solomon reigned. Now, number 2, the Indians punish and correct their children when their children are disobedient, when they do wrong, just like the Mosaic Law instructed the Jews to correct their children when they were disobedient. So the Cherokee Indians followed God's instruction for the punishment of their children who were disobedient. What does the word say? Proverbs chapter 13, verse 24. He that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes. That's a King James word. Or means is diligent to discipline that child. Proverbs 22:15. Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him. Isn't that true? The truth. Those of you with kids, you didn't have to teach your kids to lie, did you? Johnny could pull little Susie's hair and you'd be watching them, and she'd start to cry, and you'd say, Johnny, did you pull her hair? And he'd go, even if he may not be old enough to talk, but he'd go. When you watch them, why? Because we're all born in sin. Sin is in our nature. That's why we need to be born again. Proverbs chapter 22, verses 13 and 14. Withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beatest him with the rod, he shall not die. Thou shalt beat him with the rod, and shalt deliver his soul from hell. Now, this is not referring to physically abusing your child. There are some occult groups that are religious groups that they have more than one wife, and they live in communities, and they hold those people literally prisoners. And they are known to actually beat their kids to the point of they've even killed some of their kids. I'm not going to name any of these occult groups, but they're religious groups. They may be sincere, but they're sincerely wrong. You don't beat a child and physically abuse them. You whip them to correct them. So it's not referring to physically abusing a child, but whipping that child out of love in order to correct them. My mother whipped me with a hickory. She took a hickory on Sunday to church. And if any of us 3 kids misbehaved, all she'd have to do, she didn't, nobody else saw it, but she'd just pick that little hickory up like this and wave it, and us kids would go, because we knew what was coming next. If we made another sound, she'd jerk us up, take us outside, and apply that hickory tea to our settee, and she would whip us. When we needed it, she would never whip us when we were being obedient and doing what she told us. It was only when we was rebellious and disobedient that she whipped us with that hickory. So Adair says that the Indians, the Cherokee Indians, they are careful about their young people, and they always punish them when they do wrong, but they punish them in love, and they tell them why they're whipping them. And Adair puts this account in his book that he watched an older Indian man whipping a younger Indian boy with a whip. And all of the time that he was whipping this young boy, he was speaking to him in love, explaining to him what he did wrong, why it was wrong, why he was having to correct him. And Adair said that when the Indian man was finished whipping him, that boy, he hugged him, told him he loved him, and that the boy was content because he understood that he deserved to be whipped. And the older Indian told Adair that he corrected the boy through love. He said, according to the ancient custom, to cause him to shun evil and to imitate the virtues of his forefathers. How would they know how their forefathers brought correction to their children? Because they had been taught that through the generations, because they're descendants of the tribes of Israel. Now, what was God's instruction? Proverbs chapter 3, verses 11 and 12. My son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of his correction. For whom the Lord loveth, he correcteth, even as a father the son in him in whom he delighteth. We get corrected, don't we? God don't physically whip us. We get convicted in our spirit when we say an unkind word, when we react wrong, when we do something wrong. The Holy Spirit pricks our hearts, convicts our hearts. We are to embrace that. We're to say, thank you, Lord, for correcting me. And because the discipline, the chastening, we're not to despise it, because he said that a father is going to discipline his son because he loves his son. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 1. A wise son heareth his father's instruction, but a scorner heareth not rebuke. So a wise son's going to listen when his father is correcting him, bringing instruction to him. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And you may say, oh, I brought my children up in church, I trained them, they know the word, but yet now they are away, they're not walking with God, they're away from God, living in sin. But you have the promise in the word that they will return. They will come back to God. They will serve God. They may have got off of God's path for their life for a temporary time, but they are coming back. They are coming back. Why? Because that word has been planted in their heart. And they may veer off the path, but they will be brought back. They'll come back to the Lord. And this is a verse you can stand on, parents. If you've trained your children up and raised them in church and now they're living like the devil, you can say, they're coming back. They're coming back into the fold. They will serve God because I have the promise of his word. Now, Proverbs chapter 29, verse 17 says, correct thy son, and he shall give thee rest. Yea, he shall give thee light unto thy soul. So, if you correct the child, teach the child to do right, you can lay down, you can rest, knowing that, hey, I have instilled godly principles into this child, and the Lord will make sure that that child comes back and walks in the path of righteousness and holiness. Now, number 3, how the Cherokee Indians handle those that were taken captive. Now, ladies, you're going to love this. I tell you, I have learned so much in this study on the Cherokee Indians. Even though I'm part of Cherokee, I have never sat down and studied in detail like I have done over these weeks. Now, how the Cherokee Indians handle those that were taken captive. For example, if a Cherokee tribe was fighting a Chickasaw tribe, and the Cherokee tribe took some of these Chickasaw braves captives, they would be brought back into the Cherokee community. Listen, and it was the elder women who made the decision about what to do with these captives. It wasn't the Indian chief, it wasn't the Indian braves that had went and fought against this enemy tribe, but it was the elder women in the Cherokee villages that made the decision about what would happen to these captives. And there says that usually, if it was to say the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, whatever nation, whatever tribe that they was fighting, those captives were brought back into the Cherokee village, and they were taken into families. They were adopted into the Cherokee families in order to replace their dead loved ones. Whether it was an older Indian that had passed away, no matter what, the elder women of the Cherokee villages made the decision. Normally, they would say, hey, we will keep them alive. We will just adopt them into our tribe. Unless these captives were particularly atrocious, vicious, maybe had murdered many of the Cherokee people, unless they had done something really atrocious, really bad, then the Cherokee women of the community would give the command for them to be tortured to death, for them to be killed. Why? Because they had mercilessly killed those of their tribe, the Cherokee tribe. They had not shown them mercy, but they had killed them willfully, deliberately, and so the elder women would then decide their fate, whether they lived or died. Isn't that amazing? Not the chief, not the Indian braves that went out and fought, but it was the elder women that decided the fate of the captives. And usually, unless they were evil and vicious and had murdered their Cherokee people, usually they were accepted into the Cherokee clan. They became part of the Cherokee community. And most of the time, the Indian tribes fighting one another, it would be over land, hunting rights, water, things of that nature. It wasn't because they hated one another per se. It was because they needed what this other tribe had. And so usually that's why the Cherokee women would say, we'll adopt them. Why? Because it wasn't that Indians' fault that their tribe went into battle with the Cherokees. And so all of the tribes in this day, back in the 1700s, they had tribal systems in place that were very similar, if not identical, to the Cherokee Indians. They were very similar in their ceremonial fires, their dances, their songs, their medicine, and their ceremonies. So all those who had been taken captive, they would have no problem becoming part of the Cherokee clan family and marrying within the community. They would be adopted and they would become part of the Cherokee tribe. I thought that was amazing, that it was the older women, the adult women who made the decision as to what happened to the captives. Number 4, quote, Indians strictly adhere to the law of Moses. He who sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. Genesis chapter 9, verse 6. Like the Israelites, their hearts burn violently day and night without intermission till they shed blood for blood. They transmit from father to son the memory of the loss of their relation or one of their own tribe or family, end quote. So it's blood for blood, and it's passed down from generation to generation, just like in the Old Testament days. There said that the Cherokee Indians, they follow the law of Moses in shedding blood for blood, murder for murder, not accidental, but murder for murder. And we can see this time and again in the Old Testament. Look at 2 Samuel chapter 21, verses 1 through 9. We won't have time to read the whole passage, but it's the account of a famine came to the nation of Israel during King David's reign, and it lasted 3 years, year after year, and David inquired of the Lord, what's the reason? There's got to be a reason. We've sinned somewhere, or this famine would not be upon their land, because God always brought rain to the land for their crops. And the Lord answered, it's for Saul and for his bloody house, because he slew the Gibeonites. Who were the Gibeonites? Years before, the Gibeonites had entered into a covenant with the nation of Israel. That means if I have to fight, then you have to fight with me, because we're in covenant with one another. But instead of honoring and keeping covenant with the Gibeonites, King Saul had killed a bunch of them. And so God said, hey, I'll tell you why this famine has come. It's because you have broken the covenant that you made with these Gibeonites. So, verses 2 through 5, King David calls the Gibeonites to come before him. And he said, in what do you want in order for this famine to stop? And God to send rain. Verse 6, the Gibeonites said to King David, let 7 of his sons, talking about Saul, Saul is the one who had killed their people. And so the Gibeonites said to King David, let 7 of Saul's sons be delivered unto us, and we will hang them up unto the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, whom the Lord did choose. And the king said, I will give them. So 7 of King Saul's sons were hung on trees. They were, we would say crucified, but they were hung on trees. They were hanged because Saul had killed the Gibeonites, violated the covenant that God and the children of Israel had entered into with this nation of people, the Gibeonites. So it was life for life. You killed my people, therefore your sons are going to pay the price. So the hatred, the animosity was passed down from generation to generation. That had been years before when that happened, but the Gibeonites still remembered it, and they wouldn't let the nation of Israel by without being punished. Now, let's give another example. Ezekiel chapter 25. Obadiah chapter 1. The little book of Obadiah only has 1 chapter. We have the account of the Edomites. Who were the Edomites? They were the descendants of Esau. And the descendants of Esau, the Edomites, hated God's people. They hated the nation of Israel. Why? Because Esau hated his brother Jacob. What had Jacob done? Remember, he stole his brother Esau's birthright and his blessing. So Jacob said, my father's old, and after my father dies, I'm going to kill my brother. So this ongoing hatred between the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, and the nation of Israel, it was passed down from generation to generation. How do we know? In Judges chapter 11, after God brought the children of Israel out of Egyptian bondage, they had crossed the Red Sea, and they came, guess where they came to? The land of Edom, where the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, lived. And so Moses being in charge, and then Joshua took over after Moses' time. So they asked the king of the land of Edom if they could pass through their land. And the king of Edom said, no way. And they said, look, we'll pay you for water. We won't eat any of your food. Just let us pass through your land. They said, no way. You're not coming into my land because, why? There was ongoing hatred from throughout the generations. Esau hated his brother Jacob, was going to kill him. So you know what Israel had to do? Read it in Judges chapter 11. The whole nation, 2.5 million people, had to turn around and go a longer distance to go around the land of Edom, because the king of Edom said, you're not coming in here because your ancestors hated my ancestors. And we have another example, Genesis chapter 16. It's the most well-known example. It's the strife between Abraham's 2 sons, Isaac and Ishmael. Isaac was the son of promise, whose descendants are the children of Israel. Today is the nation of Israel. Ishmael was the son of Hagar. That was Sarah's handmaid. And there was continual contention and strife between these 2 boys as they were growing up in the same house. Sarah got so fed up with it that she told Abraham, cast down this bondwoman and her son, get them out of my house. And so we know that their descendants have been arguing, fighting. They have hated each other from the time of Isaac and Ishmael all through the years. Look at the nation of Israel now and the Arab Islamic nations around them. They're in the Middle East, fighting to this day. There is a war going on against Islamic nations, the descendants of Ishmael. Think about it. That ongoing hatred is passed down from one generation to another. And now, we got to hurry, we'll be out of time. And the fifth similarity is when one Indian tribe was declaring war with an enemy army, when they arrived in the enemy territory, they threw a firebrand within their land, that enemy's land, as an emblem of the anger of Ash, A-S-H, which is the Hebrew word for fire. So, as an emblem of the holy fire, for the evil that they had committed against God's beloved people, the Cherokee Indians would throw a firebrand into the land of their enemies when they approached it. And it there says that Obadiah alludes to this custom, quote, when he says in Obadiah verse 18, they shall kindle in them and devour them. There shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau. And the Septuagint translates this verse, one who carries a firebrand. And it there says that Israel's champion, Samson, did to the Philistines. He got this from Obadiah's instruction. You remember Samson, he came into the land of the Philistines. What did Samson do? He caught 300 foxes, tied their tails together, set their tails on fire, and those foxes burned down the Philistines' cornfield. Joshua in Judges chapter 15, verses 4 through 5. And Samuel went and caught 300 foxes and took firebrands and turned tail for tail and put a firebrand in the midst between the two tails. And when he had set the brands on fire, he let them go into the standing corn of the Philistines and burned up both the shocks and also the standing corn. So the Cherokee Indians, when they approached the enemy territory, they would throw a firebrand into the enemy's land, saying, I'm coming after you. And the sixth similarity is that there says that there has never been any people on the face of the earth who pursued the Mosaic law of retaliation with such eagerness as the Indian Americans to avenge blood. And there said that he has known Indians to go as much as 1,000 miles over hills, mountains, and through the rapid rivers in swamps containing poisonous snakes, enduring heat and cold, hunger and thirst, as the revenger of blood, hunting the one who murdered his relative. We have an example of this in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy chapter 19, verses 1 through 7. God told Israel, when you enter into the promised land, and when you're to set up, you're to build cities of refuge, so the man who kills someone accidentally can run to this city for safety and protection, lest the avenger of blood pursue the slayer while his heart is hot and overtake him because the way is long and slay him, whereas he was not worthy of death, inasmuch as he hated him not in time past. So, in Old Testament days, it didn't matter if it was an accident that a relative was killed. The relative, and it was usually the closest relative of the one who was killed, would pursue him, would hunt his murderer down, and he would kill him in order to avenge the blood of his relative. Remember, we read it in Exodus 21, 23 through 25. The law said eye for an eye, hand for a hand. It was a life for a life. And I'll cover the cities of refuge in detail in the next lesson, so I won't have time to even touch on it here. Now, number 7, among the Cherokee tribes, if one of their tribe was killed, revenge must be taken for the crying blood of the one who was killed. We have an example of this in the Bible. After Cain slew his brother Abel, God told Cain in Genesis chapter 4, verses 8 through 11, and we won't have time to read the whole passage, but Cain and his brother Abel were together. And Cain rose up and he slew him. He killed his brother Abel. And God said to Cain, where is Abel thy brother? He said, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? And God said, verse 10, what have you done? The voice of thy brother which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. Blood has a voice. Innocent blood cries out. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 24. And to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling, look at it, that speaketh better things than that of Abel. Blood has a voice. Abel's blood cried out for vengeance. Oh, but Jesus' blood cries out for mercy. Hallelujah. Aren't you glad Jesus' blood is speaking blood? We deserve to die in our sins, but Jesus' blood is crying out for mercy. His blood covers our sins. Through Jesus' blood, we have mercy. And the last one we'll have time to touch on is among the Indian tribes, quote, if indeed the murder be committed by a kinsman, the eldest can redeem, end quote. In other words, among the Cherokee tribe, if two young boys were together, they may be practicing bow hunting or shooting their bow and arrow. And among the Cherokee tribe, the young boys are taught, they're trained, they're raised not by their father, but by their uncles on their mother's side. I didn't know that. I thought that was amazing. For example, if you got two 12-year-old boys, if you got an Indian boy from the Paint clan, and if he accidentally shoots his friend who's from the Bird clan, if he accidentally shoots him with that arrow while they're practicing with their bows and arrows, then the family from the Bird clan is going to come to the Paint clan and expect that 12-year-old boy from the Paint clan to forfeit his life, to make things even again, the Cherokees would say. So the family of that Bird clan comes to the family of the Paint clan and says, you killed one of our relatives. Now you forfeit your life. You die. And the young boy would honor it. He would say, you're right, I did. I killed him. And I allow you to take my life. And they would do it. The revenger of blood. But if that young boy's uncle stepped up and said, this boy has never played a Cherokee ball game. He's never gone to war. He's never married. He doesn't have kids. His existence would cease. The uncle says, I'm an older man. I have kids. I've been to war. I've lived my life. His mistake doesn't belong to him. It belongs to me because I'm the one who raised him. And as his uncle, I'm responsible for the way he behaves in the community. I'm responsible for him to do what he's supposed to do. The failure is not his, but it's mine. So, on behalf of my nephew, I step in front of him. I stand in front of the family who expects payment of death for their loved one who died. And I say, you need a life for a life. You need this boy's life for the life of the boy that he killed. We all agree. But today, think about it. He's just a young man. He made a mistake. He didn't do it intentionally. I'm the one responsible for him. And if you'll accept it, I'll offer my life instead of his. And they would accept it. They would accept the uncle's life. He would die instead of the young nephew. The uncle redeems. He pays the price. He redeems the life of his nephew by paying the price for his own life. And that's exactly what the Lord Jesus did for you and I. We were guilty of sin. We deserve to die for our sins. Oh, but Jesus, our kinsman redeemer, he said, Father, I'll pay the price to redeem them. I'll pay the penalty of death. The penalty for sin is death. It's a life for a life. But Father, I'll die in their place. I'll give my life in exchange for their life. I'll die, Father, in order that they may live. And not just so that they can live, but that they can have life more abundantly. Just as I said in John chapter 10, verse 10. So, Father, I will die in their place. I want them to have life and have it to the fullest. So I will die so they can live. And that's exactly what he did. Aren't you glad that Jesus paid the price and redeemed you? Can you say amen?
Amen.
Thank you, Lord.